Good afternoon. My name is Leon, and I'm moderator for the session today. The advice I was given was that a good moderator speaks the least. So I will try and make sure that they're the ones who do all the speaking. When Razi asked me to come and do this, I asked him, I said, what do I know about publishing? And he said, no, you've got lots of management experience. Look at it from a management perspective. Look at it from a marketing perspective. And I got thinking about it. What is the business model that publishing operates in? And the ecosystem. A business model basically means how you make money. Even a hospital needs to know how to make money, as does a non-profit. And the ecosystem is all the different elements that go into any business, any environment that you have. These days, business models for everything, banking is changing, cricket has changed, golf has got a live, golf has come into play. The way in which movies are made and distributed, OTT platforms, so many different things that keep changing all the time. So publishing is not going to be any different. So I was looking at it, and I'll put this to the panel in terms of your business model now, how it's changing, what are some of the challenges, and we can explore it from the perspective of the publisher, the large publishers, the smaller publishers, the writers, how do they approach or how do they get approached? How does distribution, how has that changed? And of course, from the reader's perspective. And one thing I noticed in these last few days is there's a controversy with regard to airbrushing the works of Roald Dahl, who's a famous children's book writer, and they're trying to remove certain words that he used, which are considered offensive today, but were perfectly fine 30 or 40 years ago. So those are some of the impacts to the business right now. And I'll start by introducing the panel. As I said, they'll be very brief. We have Sam Perera from Sri Lanka. He's here supported by his wife. He owns a company called Perera and Hussain, and she's the Hussain part of it. Okay, they're a publishing house, and they have many famous authors to their credit, including his wife. Ameena Sayyid, the doyen of this literary festival, started it, all these literary festivals in 2010. And she's much decorated. She has an OBE from the UK. She has Knight of Arts and Letters from the French, Star of Distinguished from Pakistan, headed Oxford University Press for 30 years, first lady to run a multinational in Pakistan, and also has her own publishing house, New One, that she started 5 years ago. She's also the founder of the Adab Festival. Bilal Zahir, he's founder and editorial director of Folio Books. He has interests in political philosophy, where he's got an MA. He does a lot of teaching, research, writing, and he's involved with an anti-capitalist movement. That means he has no money. Maniza Naqvi is a well-known author, and among the many books that she's written, Mass Transit, The Inn, Sarajevo, Saturdays, Stay With Me, A Matter of Detail, On Air. Did I leave any out? No. And our guest from overseas, another guest overseas, Alexandra Pringle, founding director of Virago Press, editor-in-chief of Bloomsbury Publication, literary agent for many famous writers, honorary doctorates from Anglia Ruskin and Warwick Universities, honorary fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, and patron of the Index on Censorship. So, without further ado, let me ask you from your perspective, let's start with you. What is changing in the publishing world, and how is it impacting your business?
Sorry, thank you. Can you hear me? Am I on? Okay. I think that publishing is constantly dynamic and changing, but also in some essential ways never changes, because you talked about business models, but I think the thing about publishing is that it's the worst business model in the world, because there is no way that people can predict actually what's going to work and what isn't going to work. It's much easier, I think, with non-fiction, particularly more the sort of academic side, because you have a kind of level that you know there is an audience of a certain number of people. But when it comes particularly to fiction and more sort of expressive and artistic forms of non-fiction, it's just gambling. And what has happened in recent years is that we've had the advent of the e-book, and there's always lots of discussion about that, and people get really hot under the collar and upset, and they say, oh, I hate the e-book, I only read real books, and so on. And I say, let's embrace everything. They're fantastic, and the more forms in which people can read, the better. It also means that books can stay in print forever. 20 years ago, books disappeared, and no one ever talks about that. So I think that technology has been extremely beneficial to publishing, and that we should embrace it and move with it.
Great. Thank you. Bilal.
I think there's a local situation with publishing in Pakistan, and I must mention that the publishing industry broadly most likely doesn't exist within the imagination of state and governments in Pakistan. If it does, it exists in the form of a textbook producing entity. And that's where precisely I think the problem lies. But very much within the production sector, for instance, the prices of the paper, the recent situation has impacted publishers immensely. I think many of the small publishers have gone out of business. But there's also a larger global situation at play, the big five we all keep talking about within the publishing industry. Just take a look at this statistic that just in 2022 in the US, the big five produce only about 10 to 20% of the total number of books, but control about 80% of the trade book industry. So that's the kind of hegemony, that's the kind of oligarchization of publishing that we live within. And the small, independent, left-wing presses like Folio Books have been having hard time for quite a long time, but precisely in these conditions, the situations actually get worse, and there is no structure at play, there is no support system at play in Pakistan, for instance. I think instead of relying completely on governments and the state in the country, because there is a situation of abandonment, of anarchy, we probably, the like-minded, small, progressive publishing houses, probably need to forge certain alliances to get the ball rolling.
Thank you. I think things are changing very rapidly in Pakistan as far as publishing is concerned. In a way, I would say that we are following what has happened in the UK, in the sense that there were, of course, a very large corporate publishers, global publishers, but there were also very successful smaller publishers. I mean, publishers like C. Hurst and Company and many others who were doing extremely well, who had a focus on a certain kind of list, but they were independent, strong, local publishers. And I feel that the same thing is now happening in Pakistan. I mean, it's in the context of the overall change that's taking place. I remember in the 60s and 70s, parents wanted somehow that their children should take the civil service exam and become civil servants. That was the dream of every young person and their parents. After that, the dream became getting a job as an executive in a corporate entity. Joining Shell or Lever Brothers or these big companies. I mean, if somebody got a job in one of these companies, then they were set for life. Now, that's not the case. Now it is all young people, with the encouragement of their parents, are entrepreneurs. And they're doing well as entrepreneurs. They're starting their own companies. And actually, many of them, even at a young age in their 20s and 30s, have become rich. And I like to say that I'm one of them in the sense, but I'm not in my 20s. I started my startup when I was in my 70s. And I'm very proud of that. And when people hear about it, they laugh at me. Because I was, for 30 years, the head of OUP in Pakistan. And towards the end, I became disillusioned because it was such a big organization, it was such a global organization. And initially, when it wasn't that big, or maybe the management was different, I had a lot of autonomy. And I could make decisions, and I would make crazy decisions like launching a literature festival, for example, in 2010, and I was encouraged. But then later, there was a lot more control. So I became frustrated, and I felt that, I have to now start my own company. That is when I launched Lightstone Publishers 5 years ago. And it's very exciting because I can make my own decisions. I can move, turn books around, publish them much more quickly. The process has been reduced. And becomes more agile. So it's very exciting.
Thank you. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank the Lahore Literary Festival both for having me here and for such an amazing program. I have thoroughly enjoyed every event that I have been to in the last 3 days. Well, I agree with everything. I have to say that my model of publishing hasn't really changed that much in the last 20 years. I publish Sri Lankan authors writing in English, which you might consider a bit of a niche. But it also allows me to bring in a certain cultural element or cultural relevance to my publishing, which I don't find in either mainstream or broad-stream publishing. So from that point of view, my strategy has remained unchanged. But of course, yes, I love technology and the fact that it has kicked in, and I can put all my books as e-books and that they have a long tail, and that I no longer look at my inventory and think, oh my God, how am I going to get rid of all this? So there are positives to the negatives. Then, of course, COVID came around and I think upset the balance of everybody's established trend of publishing and distributing. And in Sri Lanka, we've had other challenges apart from the COVID lockdowns. And Sri Lanka had a very serious lockdown where none of us could go to work. And then we had political disturbances. We overthrew a president peacefully. Our currency crashed. Everything has become 3 times as expensive. So books that were never really considered essential on anybody's shopping list went up suddenly by about 3 times the price, which, if they thought it was unaffordable before, makes it doubly unaffordable now. Which again, I'm happy for the e-books because I don't really have to change the price of that. I can keep the price low. And there are many other things I'd like to say, but I'll pass it on to my colleague.
Well, you heard what Alexandra said, what Bilal said, what Ameena said, and what Sam said. I'll try to put it all together and say that one of the biggest crazy things that Ameena did for me was that she published my first novel, Mass Transit, that OUP could do because they were small. But that got me started on my career as a writer. And 6 books later, and also having experience in trying to stop a struggling, closing down bookshop from closing down, I learned a lot about the publishing industry, the printing industry, and also had the lens of a writer and the frustrations that come with that. You don't know how many books you've sold, you never see royalties, and you might not even get published though you think your work is brilliant. So then the pandemic came along, and we were all in a lockdown, and I realized that the publishers in Pakistan, particularly the smaller publishers, the independent publishers, they were having an incredibly difficult time because paper in Pakistan is imported. So already the cost of producing a book is so high, and it's unaffordable for people who really, the real people who read. They can't afford a 1,200 rupee or a 2,000 rupee book. So I went against my own instincts as a writer and thought, well, I have to give in to the idea of an e-book. And so I came up with a startup. I have a great team sitting out of Karachi, and my e-book company is the first e-book company of Pakistan, and it's called the Little Book Company, littlebookcompany.net. We've just developed our Android app, and the iOS Apple app should be out in a couple of days. And this is we've completed 2 years as a startup. And our business model is that we transfer 70% of our sales to the publisher or to the author, whoever comes on board as our client. That's our business model. And each author or publisher, whoever is our client, gets their own dashboard on our site, on our platform, where they can monitor their sales in real time. Now, the business model, when I think about it, is that the business of books is not a business. It's a struggle. Writing is a struggle. Books are a struggle. And in my view, the most progressive act of resistance that you can possibly do is write. And I thought, well, how do I take all of that, help all voices, give access, come underneath the publishers who are thinking, give them the ability to have their backlists available way beyond Pakistan. So we have done that with the ebook company, littlebookcompany.net, and we have a two-tiered price structure, which is that in Pakistan, the book, let's say, sells for 200 rupees or 150 rupees. I think we've got books on board which are just 50 rupees, all the way up to, we try not to go beyond 500 rupees. That's what we advise our authors and publishers, and they listen to us. But abroad, outside of Pakistan, the prices are in dollars, and they start at $5, $7, $10, they go up to $15. So that way, we use our pricing outside to subsidize our pricing within Pakistan. And yes, so the business model is every day that we don't fail is a good day.
Can I say just one word about corporates? Yes, I just wanted to add to what Bilal said about what is happening with the corporations, because I couldn't agree more, and it's really chilled me that there are now so few publishers left. They're just these enormous corporations, and Penguin Random is the most depressing of all. But they, of course, did try and buy Simon & Schuster, and that was thrown out. So maybe there's a ray of hope. But the thing that gives me the greatest hope is that if you look at all the prize shortlists, certainly in the UK, and I think a bit in the US, they are filled with books published by tiny presses. The Booker Prize last year, the Man Booker, the International Booker Prize, and the Nobel Prize of last year were all won by authors who are published by very small presses, and the corporations don't have the imagination or the fearlessness. They are becoming more and more timid about what they do, and they follow what they think of are trends. But the people who are backing, who have the taste and the energy and the commitment to back new voices, are the small presses. So I think we need to just look to them for the future. Gives you hope.
Good point, because you mentioned the big five of publishing in auditing and consultancies. There are big fives, banks, there are big fives, and so on and so forth. So I want to explore with you the power dynamics of this in terms of who has the power. Is it the publisher? Is it the writer? What happens when a writer comes first time to you? He's unknown. You're taking a risk on him. It's like an unknown actor who has to go from casting call to casting call. Maybe he gets picked up, then he becomes a big star, then he names his price. So these are all things in the scheme of things. Any one of you who would like to respond to that? Yeah.
I think probably Alexandra would answer that question better, because she's been experimenting with different genres and has been primarily interested in fiction for quite a long time. In case of a publisher like me, who's been embedded with non-fiction, precisely academic non-fiction, the risks involved are not that immense. So, we know that the market, the size, the print run is never going to increase. So, for us, it's mostly about a print run of 500 copies of an academic work on politics, history, feminism, and so on. So, in terms of the power dynamics, running a small, independent academic publishing house, none of us has any power. So the publishing house, for instance, at the end of the day, just to speak empirically, makes only about 10% of the price of the book. So that's the kind of power dynamics I hold as the director of the publishing house. The author makes about 7.5% or 8% of the book. So the entire model is doomed to, I wouldn't say failure, but doomed to sort of remain small. The 50% of the price of the book goes to the bookseller. About 20-25% to the production cost, 7 to 8% to the author, then some running expenses, some office expenses, and about 10% is the kind of amount that's left. And that is how terrible the situation is with the small publishing industry all over the world, but more so in Pakistan. As you mentioned that there have been the winners of Booker prizes and winners of lots of other prizes, and most of them have been coming from within the small indie press industry. In case of Pakistan, it's sort of even worse that, we keep making housing societies after housing societies, creating disasters for our local ecologies. Our rivers are evaporating, our agricultural land is shrinking, but no priority or no sort of importance given to the written word, to the published world. And this is an industry which lies within the realm of a productive sector of economy. It's linked to education, it's linked to research, it's linked to pedagogy, so much and so more. But no special, no sort of significance attached to it by the state or the governments after governments. That's not probably too different in many other parts of the world, but I think it's sort of worse in South Asia. We are trying to make it work by reaching out to like-minded authors, by reaching out to like-minded publishers, by sort of making partnerships with like-minded presses in India, in the UK, and the US, and continue to sort of create those forces of resistance to just be around and let the written, the published word thrive.
Thank you for that. Ameena, in your case, the power dynamic was different because it came from within the organization, where you went from having so much autonomy to having so much control over you. So that's something that we don't see from the outside. The other thing is, you always hear of authors getting these multi-million-dollar advances for books. And here we're talking about pennies being collected and people struggling to make them. So in response to the other question that I had asked with regard to the power dynamic, anybody like to say something else on that? The power dynamic. So it could be the publisher, it could be the writer, it could be the distributor. There are so many different moving parts in this thing.
Well, I think that's a moving target, power dynamics. I think sometimes, for very high-profile authors, publishers are running after them. And sometimes authors are running after publishers. The number of manuscripts that I get, again, from from relatively new, unknown authors, it's a very large number. But of course, being a publisher and being, like all publishers, wanting to sell a best-selling author, that's always on my mind. And I'm very happy that this change has actually now taken place in Pakistan of our very high-profile authors whose books sell very well. We were lucky to get, for example, Omar Shahid Hamid, who came to us with his latest book, Betrayal, which has become a bestseller, and we've just done a third impression of it. And what was the reason? Why did he come to a new publisher like Lightstone? The reason was actually, initially, as you know, most Pakistani writers who wrote fiction would be published in India. And then I discovered that I got a very good Pakistani writer, and I offered rights to an Indian publisher. And I said, you can have Indian rights, but I'm going to retain Pakistan rights. And they said, then we are not interested. Because most of our books that we publish in India sell in Pakistan by Pakistani writers. And they were not interested in publishing for India. After the trade broke off between India and Pakistan, Pakistani authors found that their books were not available. So perforce, they had to come to Pakistani writers, publishers to publish their books. And I'm very happy to learn that Mohsin Hamid, and now actually what has happened after the fall of the rupee, books have become so expensive. I mean, just this morning I spent in the bookshops here, and I found that imported books were 3,000 rupees, fiction, 2,500, 3,000 rupees, some going up to 5,000 rupees, fiction and non-fiction. Now, Mohsin Hamid has, I think, very wisely taken all the rights back to his books from his publishers. He's given them to a Pakistani publisher, Readings in Lahore. And then I saw Omar Shahid Hamid's books published by Readings, 599 rupees. So, I mean, that's really the only way to, if you want to promote readership, I'm afraid price is a very important factor. The other thing is, which we do a lot, and I'm sure all of you do, publishers, when we publish a book, we shout from the rooftops. We promote it at every possible event, and we try to create events. I think in Pakistan, you have to, you cannot, you have to force people to buy books. You have to make it so attractive for them to read a book, to buy a book. You have to really marketing and promotion is something that we spend a lot of our time on.
Okay, so in a way, the fact that the Indians don't want to publish Pakistani work is a great opportunity for us to develop our own different markets.
Yeah, they don't want to publish for India. They
No,
want to publish
okay.
for Pakistan.
Oh, okay. I noticed even the academic textbooks are all Indian, published in Indian content. Okay, so this morning there was a session that I attended where they were talking about how to write, or what makes a great novel, and everything was from the perspective of the writer and the protagonist and whatever not. So from the perspective of the reader, how does the publisher look at a book and say, this is something that will be acceptable? I guess it's like a songwriter wants to write, every song wants to be a top 20 hit, but it doesn't work that way. Sam, how have you approached the issue?
Yeah, so that's a difficult one. So to go back to your previous question, I think small publishers have the big problem that they don't have a lot of money for advertising and promotion and stuff like that. And we can't afford to send authors overseas for lit festivals or whatnot. So most of our money is spent on production quality or whatever other focus that we choose, whether it is in the writing, the editing, whatever. Again, I will say that I publish mainly for a Sri Lankan market, and I'm delighted when somebody offers to buy rights to a book. And unlike Ameena, I've been very lucky that Indian publishers have agreed to let me retain Sri Lankan rights, as have both American and UK publishers. So whatever deal I strike, I always make sure that I retain Sri Lankan rights, because I think that's where my market is. But I don't have the marketing muscle to push books overseas myself. So there is that. And then, of course, now the last year's Booker Prize winner, he's a good friend of ours, Shahan Karnatilaka, but he has the sense to know that we don't have the strength to push him for the Booker, for example. Also, the Booker is limited to UK and US publishers, I think. So in any case, that makes all of us ineligible, however good the book might be. And in fact, Shahan's book came out in a previous version, an Indian version, and then it was re-edited for the UK market. So things like that will happen.
I think one of the things he mentioned maybe at the KLF was the fact that he couldn't get people to review the book. Then when it got shortlisted, then all of a sudden there were people reviewing the book. So that's another dynamic. So, Maniza, you're in a completely different niche. How is it working for you in terms of the power structure?
That's an interesting question, because I had to completely change my way of thinking when I started the ebook company, because I am coming from my work life was 30 years at the World Bank. So that should tell you a little bit about the power structure that I was used to. Sorry, Bilal. And so now, having become, taking on this little book company, I deliberately chose that name, the Little Book Company, as opposed to the Big Book Company or the Big Company. And along with bringing other publishers and already published authors onto the platform, we had started publishing books, first-time authors. And that required that I sit down with them, and since we were very small, I was not only their publisher, but I was also, to some degree, their guide, advisor, editor, all rolled into one. And I had to shift my thinking to more like a psychologist. We would meet on Zoom. We continue to meet on Zoom. I give them 1 hour. And at the end of 1 hour, I say, your time is up. They read me their first chapter or wherever we get in 1 hour. I'll stop them from time to time to say, stop at a sentence or between sentences and say, so what do you think about that? And then we'll go from there, because I might have seen a glimmer and they haven't seen it, or they haven't thought about it, and we go from there, and it becomes I think, a really wonderful process of creativity. And this goes on for months until a final product comes out, and I feel that it's collaborative, and it isn't about power at all. And what I'm trying to do with the Little Book Company is actually flatten that concept. There isn't any power. If you've got a book, we'll publish it. We just have one clause. It's unwritten. We don't have contracts. If you sent us an email with your manuscript in it, that's our contract. But there's another part which is unwritten, which is Marwana Dena Bhai. If it's a book, don't get us killed, please. If it's a book that is really controversial, we're just a little book company. We just got started. We don't want to close down tomorrow. Give us at least 5 years before we become all brave and take on anybody. So
lots of folio books.
well, as would happen, Folio Books is one of our clients, as is Lightstone, and we're bringing on publishers. So what we're trying to do is shift that power dynamic and bring in a lot of transparency, because our publishers and our writers can see their sales in real time. And every month, whatever amount we make for them, or whatever is earned, we shift it immediately, as if it's going to burn a hole in our bank. We shift it to the writer or the publisher. These are very tiny amounts. But like I said, the publishing business, the publishing and book writing is not really a business. So it takes an enormous amount of energy and struggle to take the book from the writer to the reader. So those tiny amounts that we make, to me, are huge and a source of great pride and joy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's a challenge in getting published and a challenge in not getting arrested after publishing. Okay. So I've been reminded that we have 8 minutes left. Alexandra, would you like to say something on the subject, because we've had quite a good amount of views, and then we'll open it for Q&A.
Well, I think we're looking at different sorts of power here, so I'm just going to pull out a couple of the threads. As we said, authors, when they become very successful, have more power, and a really interesting new model, and it'll be fascinating to see if it spreads, is the American writer Ann Patchett has just done a contract for her amazing new novel that's coming out this year. And with HarperCollins in America and with Bloomsbury in the UK, she's doing a profit share. So there might be a future in that, and I'll be really interested to watch that. But I think that, who has within publishing companies, there are balances of power that shift around all the time. And years ago, the power was really held by editorial. And that's less and less the case. The power is increasingly held by people in the sales departments and the marketing departments, and decisions about publishing are made by committee. And I think it's one of the reasons why the big publishers are not publishing as well as they should be. I think they're less bold. But my feeling is that all an editor has is their own taste. And I really worry when young editors start talking about the market, when they start talking about what they think people will want, because it has to come from passion within yourself. That's really all you have. And what I have is when I'm reading a manuscript, and literally sometimes the hairs on my arms go up, or I start thinking about all the people I want to get this book to read. I think, oh, I'd love so-and-so to read it. That for me is the trigger, that if I'm doing that, then it can go out further than that. And kind of that's what we have. It's sort of the beginning and the end of it, which is really annoying for other people, because it means that it really, the creative heart of a company is with editorial. It is nowhere else.
Thank you for that. So we'll open for Q&A. And yes, you can get a mic to this gentleman here. Right.
Thank you very much. I tend to agree with what Sam has been saying, and you as well. Hegemony part of it. I mean, Jo Kyle-Hersey is a good friend of mine, and she teaches at the university, Sultan Qaboos University in Muscat, Amman. She's the first Arab woman to be awarded Booker Prize. And she told me in person a few years ago that when she wrote this novel in Arabic, not many people read it, nobody recognized it in Britain or America, until somebody in Oxford translated it into English, Celestial Temptation. And then it became a bookseller, and now in the entire Middle East, she is very well known. So I think this again links up with what you were saying, that you publish in India, Pakistan, in the Arab world, in Turkey, and the books are not taken aboard. The second part, it's a question, is about the booksellers. In Oxford, where I live, Blackwell, which was considered to be a local institution, has been sold off to Waterstone. They're trying to retain the old name. But I think the booksellers have to learn lessons from all the changes which have been happening, including your Bloomsbury. I think the prices have to come down. They have to compete with these guys who are selling online. Books are terribly expensive, not just in Pakistan, but also in Britain and America.
I don't think they're expensive in Britain. I think they are. There's obviously a huge problem in Pakistan, but I think people are prepared to go out and spend a lot of money on a meal, or going to the cinema, or going to the opera or the ballet, and people are not prepared to spend money on books, which are incredibly valuable things. I think they're underpriced.
But academic books are ridiculously expensive. I completely agree. 120 pounds, 80 pounds for a book is just ridiculous.
Most of the writers, whether in the West or in the East, complain that most of the publishers make a lot of money by selling their books, but they give very little part of it to the writers. Do you think it's fair, or?
We wish, don't we? Really. It's so hard to make any money out of publishing a book. That I think people don't understand how expensive the process is and how many people are involved in it. And even if not one penny is paid as an advance, you can lose a lot of money on publishing books. I don't know. Please say some more about that.
I agree, Alexandra. I think writers do feel that publishers are making a lot of money. I think they are misinformed, and they get royalties. They get a percentage of every book that's sold. And that should give them a good idea of how many books are sold. Of course, best-selling writers get more because of royalties, but I do feel that writers also have a role in working with publishers to promote their books. I feel that, and that is why it's very important to pay royalties. I always insist on royalties because writers then become stakeholders in the sales of their books.
So sorry, I'll just jump in there for half a second. I had a French publisher friend who told me that writers think publishers are businessmen. Businessmen think that publishers are intellectuals. So it works a little bit like that. And also my wife is a writer, and I feel it's only fair to pay her royalties, and when I'm paying her royalties, I have to pay everybody else's royalties at the same time. She keeps a close eye.
My question is regarding in terms of publisher, actually, if it is not a board, then how a new talent, a new writing, actually, what then it would be the person who would the criteria, a publisher to consider that this should come to the public or not. Well, so from that perspective, from you being a publisher, well, does it matter that what is your own taste or intellect or background is, and how and to what extent it affects the selection of a certain writer to be published?
What was the question? There was the criteria to be accepted as an author?
Because it's a new writer, and when you pick up a new writer and you choose that this should come out and it is interesting, then it's your personal choice, subjectivity, that what extent it matters.
But with other people, you don't make I mean, it depends. If you're a tiny publisher, it is just you. But if you're in a bigger publisher, you have to convince your colleagues, and then you all work together. You know, it's a group effort.
Okay, I'm sorry, we have a hard stop. I have a flight to catch at 4 o'clock. Okay, so with PSL on the roads, it's going to be a little bit of a challenge. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody on the panel. Great
Thank
big
you.
round
Thank
of
you.
applause for them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leon.